The law is the law. It is carved into the ancient rock, whispered by the wind that sweeps across the Sahel, and reflected in the unflinching eye of the vulture. I had built my life on the foundation of that law. The law of the savannah. It is honest. It is brutal. And it is absolute. The strong survive. The weak perish. The herd moves on. There is no sentiment in the dust. There is no pity under the relentless sun. I was a guardian of that truth. A protector of that fierce, unsentimental balance. I had preached it. I had enforced it. I had turned my back on suffering 100 times, because that was my duty. That was the pact. But looking down at it, this tiny, shuddering flame of life, barely a flicker in the vast, indifferent darkness, the law felt like a lie. Every instinct, every year of training, every fiber of my being screamed at me, "Walk away, Traoré. This is not your burden. This is not your fight." But then a whisper. A voice from the deepest part of my soul, a part one thought had turned to stone years ago. It rose above the chorus of reason. And it said something that would shatter my world. It said, I couldn't let it die. My hand, scarred and steady from a lifetime of certainty, trembled as it hovered over the cub's matted fur. The air itself was a predator, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the coming finality of death. In the distance, the hysterical laughter of hyenas echoed, a dinner bell in this brutal kingdom. The mother was gone. Hope was gone. To interfere, to touch this creature, was to break a sacred vow I had made to this land, to my ancestors. It was to challenge the very God of this place, nature itself. But to walk away, to leave this spark to be snuffed out in the lonely dark, that was to lose a part of my own humanity I never knew I was still in danger of losing. In that moment, I was not Ranger Traoré, warden of the natural order. I wasn't an observer. I was just a man hollowed out by a choice that would redefine everything I thought I knew about strength, about survival, about myself. Before I tell you how this one impossible choice changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone who heard the story, make sure you subscribe and press that notification bell. You are not going to want to miss the twist at the heart of this story, the one that proves we are all connected in ways we can barely imagine. This isn't just a story about a man and a lion. It's a story about the moment you realize the rules you live by are smaller than the truth in your heart. My name is IbrahimTraoré. For 30 years I have walked this land. My skin is a map of its suns and its thorns. My father was a ranger before me, and his father before him was a village elder who knew the language of the birds and the secrets of the baobab tree. He taught me that to respect the land, you must respect its cruelty as much as its beauty. The lion does not apologize to the gazelle, Amadou, he would say, his voice as rough and warm as worn leather. And the earth does not weep for the seed that fails to sprout. This is the great balance. Our place is to watch, to learn, to protect the balance, not to tilt the scales with our own heavy hearts. I took his words as gospel. I saw poachers as a disease, a corruption of the natural order because their greed tilted the scales. They were the enemy. But death itself? Death from a predator's jaws, from thirst, from abandonment? That was not an enemy. That was a teacher, a sculptor. It was the harsh, steady hand that shaped life into its strongest forms. I had seen a mother elephant stand vigil over her stillborn calf for days, her grief a tangible thing, a silence that deafened the plains. And I had done nothing. I had watched a pack of wild dogs, the painted wolves, run an old wildebeest to exhaustion, and I had felt not pity, but a profound respect for the intelligence, the teamwork, the sheer life force of the hunt. My heart was not heavy. It was clear. It was the heart of a ranger, a man who understood his place. My world was one of wide open spaces and strict, narrow lines. The line between man and nature. The line between observer and participant. The line between life and death. I walked those lines every day. The morning it happened began like any other. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the acacia trees in hues of fire and gold. The air was cool and clean, not yet choked by the oppressive heat of midday. I was on the Western Patrol, a rugged, desolate stretch of territory where the red earth cracks and the bones of long-dead animals lie like fallen monuments. It was a place of ghosts. A few weeks prior, we'd had reports of poachers in the area, targeting a small, nomadic pride of lions known for their unusually dark manes. We had found their camp. Empty. But the signs of their work were there. Spent cartridges, the faint, lingering smell of illegal smoke. We never found the lions. We assumed they had moved on, or worse. That morning, the silence was different. It wasn't the peaceful silence of an ecosystem at rest. It was a hollow silence. An empty silence. I cut the engine of my Jeep, letting the quiet settle around me. That's when I heard it. It was so faint, I almost dismissed it as a bird. A thin, reedy cry, like a thread of sound unraveling in the vastness. I followed it on foot, my boots crunching on the dry soil. The sound led me to a shallow ravine, hidden by a cluster of sun-bleached rocks. And there it was. At first, it was just a small, dusty bundle of fur. A lion cub, no more than a few weeks old. Its eyes were barely open, clouded with infection. Its flank was torn, a dark, ragged wound buzzing with flies. It tried to lift its head as I approached, a flicker of its inherited defiance, but it was too weak. It could only manage another one of those heart-splitting cries. It was alone. Utterly, hopelessly alone. I scanned the horizon, my binoculars pressed to my eyes. Nothing. No mother calling. No pride watching from a distance. The stillness told me what I already knew in my gut. The poachers hadn't just passed through. They had succeeded. This tiny creature was the last, dying echo of a lineage. My training, my experience, my grandfather's voice in my head, they all spoke in unison. This is how it ends for this one. This is the law. A wave of resigned sadness washed over me. It was a tragedy, a result of human evil. But the result was now a part of nature. The cub was injured, abandoned. It would soon feed the hyenas or the vultures, or simply return its small energy to the soil. My job was not to intervene. My job was to observe, to document, and to continue my patrol, hunting the men who caused this, not to erase the consequences of their actions. I did what I had always done. I turned my back. I walked away. Each step I took back towards the Jeep felt heavier than the last. It was as if I were wading through thickening mud. The cry, faint as it was, seemed to be coming not from the ravine behind me, but from inside my own chest. Walk away, Traoré. It is the law. But the law suddenly felt like an excuse. A shield I had held up for so long, I had forgotten there was a man cowering behind it. My grandfather's words came back to me. Protect the balance. But what was the balance here? The poacher's bullets had already shattered it. My inaction wasn't protecting a natural order. It was endorsing a man-made atrocity. It was rubber-stamping an execution. I stopped. I stood there, under the rising sun, caught between the world I knew and a world that was cracking open beneath my feet. I thought of my own son years ago, when he had fallen and cut his knee. The sight of his blood, his tears of shock and pain. My immediate, unthinking instinct had been to scoop him up, to hold him, to stop the bleeding, to whisper that everything would be all right. It wasn't a choice. It was a compulsion. The purest expression of love and protection. Why was this different? Because the creature was not human? Because it had fur and claws? Did the capacity for pain and fear and loneliness recognize species? The silence from the ravine was now more terrifying than the cry. Had it stopped breathing? Had I waited too long, debating a philosophy while a life expired? I felt a hot surge of shame. What was this code I held so dear? Was it a measure of strength? Or was it a fortress of cowardice, built to protect me from feeling? From the messy, complicated, painful business of caring? I had spent a lifetime priding myself on being a man who saw the world as it was. But what if I had been blind? What if I had only been seeing the machinery and ignoring the ghost in it? What if the truest part of nature wasn't the law of the tooth and claw, but the exception? The mother bird who adopts an orphan from another nest. The dolphin that lifts a struggling swimmer to the surface. The impossible, illogical, beautiful act of compassion that defies all explanation. I had walked perhaps 200 meters. It felt like a mile. I turned around. I did not run. My steps were deliberate now, each one a decision. Each one a quiet rebellion against the man I had been just 10 minutes before. I was walking back not just to the ravine, but to a part of myself I had abandoned long ago. I knelt beside the cub. It was still breathing. A shallow, ragged rhythm. I gently shooed the flies away from its wound. Its eyes, milky with sickness, tried to focus on me. It didn't have the strength to show fear. It only radiated a pure, distilled essence of misery. I reached into my pack and pulled out my canteen. I poured a little water into the cup of my hand and held it to its mouth. At first, nothing. Then a tiny, rough tongue flickered out, tasting the moisture. It drank. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was the crossing of a line. I was no longer an observer. I was a participant. The scale had been tilted, and my hand was on it. A memory surfaced, unbidden. My grandfather, old and frail, sitting outside his hut. I was a young man then, full of the fire and certainty of my new ranger training. I had been telling him, perhaps too proudly, about how I had chased away a tourist who was trying to give food to a monkey. The balance, grandfather, I had said, puffing out my chest. I protected the balance. He had looked at me with his cloudy, wise eyes and nodded slowly. The balance is important, Amadou, he had said. But a man's heart must also have a balance of its own. A balance between the head that knows the rules and the heart that knows the truth. A life lived only by the rules is a dry riverbed. It has a path but no water. I hadn't understood him then. I had dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man whose time had passed. Now, kneeling in the dirt, his words flowed through me like a flood. I looked at the sky. I looked at the vast, unforgiving landscape. And I looked at this one, small, broken life. And I knew the rules were not enough. They were a map, but sometimes, in order to find your way, you had to leave the path. You had to follow the truth. My hand, no longer trembling, slipped beneath the cub's frail body. It was lighter than I could have imagined. A fragile collection of bone and fur and desperate hope. I lifted it into my arms. It flinched, a tiny tremor of fear, then seemed to surrender, its head resting against my chest. And as I held it, the words came out, not in a shout of defiance, but in a raw, broken whisper, spoken only to the wind and the ghosts of this place. I couldn't let it die. The journey back was a waking dream. A fever dream. With the cub wrapped in my spare shirt and tucked inside my jacket, every shadow became a threat. Every sound was magnified. The cackle of hyenas was no longer a distant commentary. It was a direct, personal threat. They knew. The scent of blood, faint as it was a dinner invitation. I walked with my rifle in one hand, the warm, fragile weight in my other arm a constant, terrifying reminder of what was at stake. The sun climbed, beating down with a physical force. The world shimmered in the heat. The cub began to pant, its small body overheating. I had to stop, finding what little shade I could under a sparse thorn bush. I gave it more water, drop by drop from my finger. Its life felt like a candle flame I was cupping with my hands, trying to shield it from a hurricane. I had to keep moving. The ranger station was miles away. Too far. But there was an old well, a halfway point I used on long patrols. It was a gamble. It might be dry. But it was the only hope. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, they came. The hyenas. A pack of 5, emerging from the tall grass like smirking assassins. They kept their distance at first, circling, their unsettling whooping calls testing my nerve. They were not afraid of me. They saw me as a man carrying their meal. I stood my ground, my back against a rocky outcrop. The cub stirred against my chest, a low mewl of distress. I laid it gently in a crevice behind me and turned to face them, chambering a round into my rifle. The sound was a sharp, metallic crack in the twilight. It gave them pause. The leader, a large female with a scarred muzzle, crept closer, her head low, her powerful shoulders bunched. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I had faced down angry elephants, cornered leopards. But this felt different. This wasn't about my own survival. It was about the promise I had made in the ravine. Go! I yelled, my voice hoarse. This one is not for you. This one is mine. They didn't understand the words, but they understood the intent. They saw the fire in my eyes. This wasn't a ranger protecting the balance. This was a father protecting his child. A primal fury rose in me that I had never known. I fired a shot into the air. The explosion echoed across the plains. The pack scattered, startled, but they did not flee. They just retreated, melting back into the growing darkness, to wait. They knew I was one man. They knew I would have to sleep. I did not sleep. All night, I sat with my back to the rock, the cub cradled in my lap, my rifle across my knees. I listened to the sounds of the African night, a symphony I had known my whole life, but it sounded different now. It sounded menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call, was a potential end to my foolish, impossible mission. I talked to the cub, whispering stories my grandfather had told me, tales of the clever spider Anansi, of the great spirit of the river. I don't know if it was for him or for me. To keep the darkness at bay. To keep the hope alive. He had survived the night. The cub was still breathing, its small body pressed against mine for warmth. And in that shared moment of fragile victory, as the first light of dawn broke the horizon, a new understanding dawned on me. Strength wasn't about turning your back. It was about turning to face the impossible. It wasn't about a clear heart, free of sentiment. It was about a heart strong enough to bear the weight of caring. If this story is already speaking to you, if you believe that one act of courage can ripple outwards, then join our community of thinkers and doers by clicking that subscribe button. We're building a space for stories that matter, for the moments that redefine us. The well was not dry. It was a miracle. A small, muddy, beautiful miracle. I lowered my bucket and brought up enough water to drink, to clean the cub's wound as best I could, and to soak a piece of cloth to cool its head. I could see the ranger station now, a tiny, shimmering speck in the distance. It looked like a lifetime away. Every step was an agony. My arms ached. My body screamed for rest. But the small, steady rhythm of the cub's breathing against my ribs was a relentless command. Keep going. I stumbled into the station like a drunkard. My uniform was torn and stained with dirt and a little blood. My face was a mask of exhaustion. My colleague, a young, ambitious ranger named Bakery, was the first to see me. He rushed out, his face a mixture of alarm and confusion. Amadou, what happened? Are you hurt? I couldn't speak. I just shook my head and held out my arms, opening my jacket. Bakery stared. His mouth fell open. He looked from the cub to my face and back again. The confusion on his face morphed into disbelief, then into something else, something I couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Disapproval? What have you done? He whispered. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. He saw a broken rule. He saw a foolish, sentimental old man who had lost his way. He saw a violation of everything we were sworn to uphold. And in that moment, I saw the man I used to be, reflected in his shocked eyes. I didn't try to explain the hyenas, the long night, the feeling in the ravine. The words would have been meaningless. The truth of it wasn't in a report. It was in the act itself. I walked past him, into the station's small infirmary, and gently placed the cub on the examination table. I found the satellite phone and called the number for the National Wildlife Sanctuary, 300 miles away. My voice was steady. I explained the situation in calm, factual terms. An orphaned male lion cub, approximately 4 weeks old. Dehydrated, malnourished, with a laceration on its left flank. A victim of suspected poaching. I said they needed to send a plane. I did not say what I had done. I did not say I had carried it for a day and a night. I did not say it had saved me. The rest of the day was a blur. The news spread through the small outpost. No one knew what to say to me. They gave me a wide berth. I was their leader, their mentor, the man who was the living embodiment of the Rangers' code. And I had shattered it. I could feel their judgment, their confusion. They saw weakness. They saw a breach of protocol that could endanger us all. What if the cub carried a disease? What if its mother had been rabid? What if my actions encouraged others, tourists, to do the same, creating a chaos of misplaced compassion? Their fears were logical. They were the fears I would have had just 2 days ago. I sat in my office, watching the sun set, the same sun that had risen on my decision. I had faced no consequences yet. No official reprimand. Only the heavy silence of my comrades. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had followed my grandfather's wisdom. I had balanced the head and the heart. Whatever came next, I would face it. I had not broken my vow to the land. I had forged a new one. A vow to the truth that compassion is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be wielded. It is the highest form of intelligence in the universe. The sanctuary's plane, a small propeller craft, arrived the next morning. A young veterinarian, a woman with kind, intelligent eyes, came to prepare the cub for travel. She cleaned the wound professionally, gave it an injection, and wrapped it in a warm blanket. She worked with a gentle efficiency. She looked up at me as she placed the cub in a small crate. "The pilot told me you found him on the Western Patrol," she said. "He is lucky." "Another few hours," she trailed off, shaking her head. I just nodded. She paused, then looked at me directly. "The report just said he was recovered. But Bakery, he told me a little more. He told me you carried him." I met her gaze. I did not need to speak. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "The law of the savannah is for the animals, Ranger Traoré. They have no choice but to live by it. But we do. That is what makes us human. We can choose to write a different law." Her words were a balm. They were the validation I didn't know I was searching for. She understood. She saw not a broken rule, but a chosen path. As they loaded the crate onto the plane, the cub let out another one of its small, reedy cries. But this time, it did not sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. I watched the plane take off, climbing into the vast blue sky until it was just a speck, disappearing towards a future I had given it. I turned to find Bakery standing beside me. He was not looking at me, but at the empty space in the sky where the plane had been. "My sister, she works at the sanctuary," he said, his voice quiet. "She will be the one looking after him. I will ask her to send updates." He still couldn't look at me, but the judgment was gone from his voice. It was replaced by something new. Respect. Understanding. He was a young man, full of fire and certainty, just as I had been. But he had seen an old man walk out of the desert with a dying lion in his arms, and something in his world had shifted. The seed of a new idea had been planted. The idea that maybe the rules were not enough. Traoré's story doesn't end with the rescue. It begins there. The cub, who they named Amadou in my honor, grew strong at the sanctuary. He would never be returned to the wild. He was too accustomed to humans, but he became an ambassador. A living, breathing story told to schoolchildren and visiting dignitaries about the cost of poaching and the power of a single choice. My story, told quietly by Bakery and then by others, rippled through the ranger community. It didn't start a revolution. It didn't change the official rules. But it started conversations. It forced men, good men, to look into their own hearts, to question the difference between a rule and the right thing. It introduced a new variable into the old equation. The variable of the human heart. The ultimate lesson is not simply to be kind. It is to recognize that our humanity is not separate from nature. It is nature. Our capacity for reason, for tool-making, for destruction, is a force of nature. But so is our capacity for illogical, defiant, world-changing compassion. To deny that compassion is to deny our own most profound, and perhaps most powerful, natural instinct. It is to live by an incomplete law. Traoré learned that true strength isn't the absence of feeling. It is the courage to feel, and to act on that feeling, even when it costs you everything you thought you were. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their heart is a compass, not a liability. And if you want to be part of a movement that celebrates courage and compassion, subscribe now. Become an insider, and let's keep telling the stories that change the world, one act of defiance at a time. This is how we protect the balance. Not just the balance of the wild, but the balance of our own souls.